Call this meeting to order. Ask us all to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. And Mr. Timniak, I could ask you to lead us in the pledge.
I'm not. The Eagle Scouts leading.
Oh, sorry, the Eagle Scout, yes. In fact, let me, my apologies. We have a special. Thanks to Troop 199, Scoutmaster Jim Machette, Eagle Scout Jonathan Perazo. Is that you, Jonathan? Great. He's going to lead us in the pledge today in honor and recognition of our late probate judge, Dan Caruso, who was himself an Eagle Scout and who I've attended, I want to say, hundreds of Eagle Scout courts of honor with the judge. So with that, if you come up to the front, all right, and please lead us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, next up, we have some minutes to consider and act upon. The minutes of regular meeting of February 21st. Is it okay to take these together?
Sure. Yes.
Regular meeting of February 21st and special meeting of March 26th, both from 2018. May I have a motion to accept?
Make a motion.
A second?
Second.
Any discussion or edits?
No. I'm okay with them.
All right, good. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Excellent. All right, and then on to the fun part. Recognition for the Fairfield Ludlow High School cheerleading team for winning the 2018 Americheer International Grand Championship. Where are the girls?
All right.
Ladies, come on in. If you can kind of surround the podium, and if your coach wouldn't mind saying a few words and giving us some background on the team and the national championship and how it all went.
We start our season in May, and we go from May until just about right now. And the girls honestly practice probably more time than any other sport. They do CrossFit training, they do private coaching, and they are a very talented group, very, very special. They deserve this more than any other team I think that I've ever coached. They have been through a lot of adversity, and I think that this was like the best way for them to end the season.
Fantastic. How many seniors?
I have 10 seniors, 3 juniors, 7 freshmen and 7 freshmen and 3 sophomores.
Okay, very good. So
Yeah.
a few folks coming back next year to help out.
Yes.
Uh-oh. Our producer, the camera's over here, so Jerry wants to make
They
sure
don't want
that
to see me. You go.
that you're getting beamed out to the entire world, I hear.
We deserve that, I think.
We certainly want to thank you and congratulate you, but also thank you for making our town so proud.
Thank
in
you.
what you've been
Thank you
able
for
to
having
accomplish
me.
here. Any comments from my colleagues?
No, congratulations. I always say thank your parents for being able to get you to and from practice and all the commitment and weekend activities you have to go through to get this done. Thank you for representing Fairfield well and making us proud. A team this large, traveling and competing at the level you did, really is special. So thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Pally.
I'd like to echo all of those thoughts and thank you very much for your hard work, your dedication, your family, your school, your coaches, and for making our town very, very proud of you. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, and on a personal note, I really, 2 things. One, I was involved in the local Pop Warner program for a number of years, so I got to watch cheerleaders and realize it's not just about the games, it's about what you're doing everywhere else. And I'm very impressed with the amount of teamwork and coordination it needs and that you exhibit in going through all that. And second, on a personal note, for one weekend in college, I was a cheerleader. Yeah, they're laughing already. You didn't really finish. But it wasn't anywhere near what you guys do. We had some fun doing it, but it was at the University of Kentucky, and we had some fun with my college friends. So I can identify with what you're doing. We were nowhere near as good as you all, obviously. So again, thank you for making our town proud. We do have some certificates for you.
All right.
So
Thank
gentlemen, if
you.
we can get up here and do all this. we'll try and
Sure. We'll figure a
get these
system out.
out to you here.
I'll slide through here, I guess.
How do you want to do this?
Let me know.
Why don't we get on this side? Get out of the way. Why don't you grab those one at a time, please? And then we've got Serenity Appeal. Did I say that
Oh,
right?
yes, you did.
Serenity, congratulations.
Thank you.
And then Kimberly Barnett. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Charlie Berry. Abigail Rucia.
She's not here.
Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Chloe Casiglia. Uh-oh. Menelaus De Jesus?
Yes.
Yes. All right. Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right, this one's easier. Rachel Fox. Alyssa Hogarth. Congratulations. Samantha Hogarth. Congratulations. Eliza Hummerstone. Congratulations. Jordan Ambrogno. Congratulations. All right, Isabel Keogh.
Thank you.
Emma Kormansky. Lily Lombardo.
Thank you.
Michaela Murdoch. Jordan Perillo. Caroline Placey.
I'm not here.
Kelly Rapasi. Rebecca Roll.
Thank you.
Jenna Simonelli. Taylor Sonnenfeld. Sophia Spagna. Delaney Woodfine. Ashley Caroline.
That's me.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ellen Cornese. Colonies.
Other coach.
Aaron.
She's not here, right?
Aaron's not here?
No.
There you go. And then Amanda O'Brien. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Again, all the best, and thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Do we get a picture?
Picture?
Yeah, let's get a picture. Cut around. Yeah.
Whatever you guys want.
Come on, you guys.
You want us in the front?
How we're gonna do this? Where's the camera? Oh, yeah, you guys are good at getting down, yeah. That's it, that was all. 2 rows would help. All right, we done?
Thank you.
Great.
Thank
Guys, thank you again. All right, next up, we have some additional recognition for National Public Safety Telecommunicators Week. Do we have, can I see Captain Smith here? Captain, come on up to the podium. This is our one time a year we get to thank our telecommunicators, our 911 operators, those folks we call on when we most need them. And each year, we have a proclamation here from the town. It says, each year, the second week of April is dedicated as National Public Safety Telecommunicators Week. And here in Fairfield, we're extremely proud and grateful to our telecommunicators for the critical function they perform 24 hours a day, 7 days a week when an emergency occurs in our community. The Town of Fairfield Emergency Communications Center, or ECC, has been in operation for 28 years. The dedicated telecommunicators who work in ECC are vital to Fairfield's emergency response, dispatching law enforcement, firefighters, emergency medical services, and other medical responders. As part of our first responder team, Fairfield's telecommunicators gather and provide information for the responders, show compassion to callers in distress, and give instructions to people experiencing medical emergencies. Fairfield's telecommunicators daily serve the citizens of the town of Fairfield by answering their calls for police, fire, and emergency medical services, and by dispatching the appropriate assistance as quickly as possible. Last year, they processed over 50,000 calls for service.
Wow.
Thanks to National Public Safety Telecommunicators Week, our community can properly recognize these professionally highly skilled and tireless heroes and highlight the demanding and often unseen essential role they play. Now therefore, I, Michael C. Tetro, First Selectman of the Town of Fairfield, do hereby proclaim the week of April 8th through April 14th, 2018 as National Public Safety Telecommunicators Week. All right. Captain Smith,
Well, thank
please
you.
fill us in.
Well, this is a group of people that work 24 hours a day,
Yep.
7 days a week. They're an integral part of our emergency team, and they're the unseen face. Whereas the police officers show up, the firefighters show up, and the public gets to see them, this group of people are the ones that are your first contact the majority of the time when you're calling for assistance, but you never get to see who they are. And it's great that we're able to recognize them and the work they do, because they're the ones that coordinate all our responses, working with police, fire, and the ambulance service to make sure that the citizens get the help they need, the correct help, when they need it. So I appreciate the recognition for all our telecommunicators, and I'm sure they appreciate it too. And I'm really proud to be able to work with that group of people, because they do a great job for us, and we depend on them daily for the work they do, not only citizens, but us as responders. So, thank you.
Any comments from my colleagues?
Captain Smith, thank you for all you do, and I like this week because it allows us an opportunity to highlight the unseen people who actually come through, like you said, the first response, the one they call. What people don't realize is it's a rapid fire.
Yes.
You know, they move from one call to the next call, and there's lots of highs and lows, whether it's an extreme emergency, life and death emergency, to you know, a tree limb fell down on the middle of the street and I'm just calling to report it to move on. So, you know, they have a tremendous amount of stress, and they never know what's calling, what type of emergency is calling. I think that's what's important about this week, that the residents at home understand that we have a department which handles that for us, and you guys do a fantastic job. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Captain Smith, thank you very much for all your work and dedication. 50,000 calls a year. That is an amazing amount of phone calls. You get the right people to the right place as quickly as you can, putting our firefighters and our policemen and women to the point of attack so they can get there and take care of matters. It's a great service that you provide, and congratulations to your entire team.
Well, thank you. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
And again, as many of our citizens, I've had the chance or the opportunity or the unfortunateness to have to call 911 And I was very impressed by the professionalism and the help and sensitivity. In one case, it was a fairly minor traffic accident for me, but in other times I've had to call for my parents, and really appreciate their help in getting a prompt response in a very serious situation.
Yeah, they have a rough job. We don't realize it sometimes, but the stress they do, and the 50,000 calls,
Yeah.
you need to double to triple that number as far as the actual phone calls they have to answer annually. You know, because every car accident, there's multiple calls and routine calls. So it's well above that even 50,000 number that they have to deal with. And you're right, they never know. It can be the routine to somebody that's having a life-threatening emergency that they've got to calm down, talk through, and not only get responders to come, but stay on the phone with them and try to calm them down and provide them assistance until one of the uniformed services can show up. So I think it's great that they're recognized, they deserve it, and they do a hard job, and they work hard under the stresses that they get. So again, thank you on their behalf.
Okay, very good. Don, if I can pass this to you so you can pass this on to them, that would be great. Thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, appreciate it.
All right, item 6 on the agenda is some special recognition for the town of Fairfield, but really the Fairfield Museum and David Scott Parker Architects receiving a Connecticut Preservation Award for the restoration of Sun Tavern and the Victorian Cottage and Barn. And Mr. Jaley, you're here from the museum. If you can step up to the podium and fill us in a bit. But
Sure, thank you.
obviously, congratulations. This is great recognition for the work you've done.
Well, I think this is we'll do a little show and tell. This is a really great recognition for the town, and particularly for the public-private partnership that the Fairfield Museum and the town of Fairfield enjoys. Last year, as we know, we completed a multi-year restoration of the historic Victorian Cottage and the historic Sun Tavern, which is a really rare, both properties are rare, but Sun Tavern in particular is a rare 18th century tavern house surviving from right after the fire during the Revolution. This award of merit is quite prestigious, and as the Connecticut Trust says, these awards recognize the outstanding achievements in protecting and nourishing Connecticut's significant buildings, landscapes, and communities. And I think that this is a project that all of us in the community can be very proud of, that we've all worked together and found a way to bring these beautiful historic properties back to the public sphere. And they are now open seasonally to the community on weekends. So we're looking forward in the end of June, or at the beginning of June, to be opening these back up and doing some educational programming around it for the community. So
Fantastic. And the Sun Tavern is where George Washington dined and spent the night on one of his trips through
that's
Fairfield.
correct. And so did Ben Franklin, and John Adams and his wife Abigail also spent the night there.
Wow.
So
Phenomenal.
it has quite a prestigious presidential series of visits.
Love the feeling. Any comments from my colleagues?
Yeah, Mr. Jaley, the
Sure.
properties are beautiful. You guys have done a great job on them, and we're very proud of them. And they are now preserved for generations going forward, and that is a great thing.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for all you've done. Like I love coming there on the weekends, touring it. I love seeing other families come and seeing it for the first time. And it's something which wasn't there when I was a child growing up in Fairfield, and I'm happy that it's on display for families to take advantage of, and seeing our history.
Right, thank you, Chris. And I think what's neat about these properties is that they're really foundational to the combined town and Fairfield Museum's vision to make this space a really wonderful community resource, a community park.
Yes.
We're planning a whole series of great performances and public educational activities this season, so hopefully everybody will come on out and enjoy.
And I think it's also important for everybody to note that, and I know you and I have had a chance to work together on this, but Mike, it's really your vision that's put all this together, that's helped us get the grants, put the packaging together, and help us shape all this. So I want to thank you for your work in preserving Fairfield's heritage.
Great, thank you, appreciate it, it's an honor.
All right, thank you again. I can't wait to get out there this summer. All right. Item 7 is an update from the Strategic Plan Committee. John Wynn, the chair, had called and asked me if we could move that to another month, so we're going to postpone that at this point, if that's... and that'll move us on to item 8, which is the H. Smith Richardson Clubhouse Building Committee, to hear an update from the committee.
Good afternoon.
Please, Mr. Curley.
Thanks for having us today. What I'd like to do is
I understand you've got a full agenda, so I can make this as quick or as detailed as you'd like. But when the building committee was formed, we promised that we would come back and give periodic updates. So this is the first of likely many over the next number of months. I had shared with your committee a brief package. We don't need to get into it in detail, but I did want to get into a few things. The first thing on the list was an update on the budget. This board had given the building committee $250,000 to work with for the through the design phase.
Right.
We had gone through that in detail. We had worked to support that number through the approval process with the Board of Finance and Board of Selectmen, or sorry, the RTM. And for the most part, the lion's share of that 250 was expected to go towards the architect design invoices. There was a little bit of a disconnect. The owner's rep, we've got Colliers on the project as the owner's rep. The cost of Colliers was a little bit of a hurdle, to be candid. They're going to cost about $81,000. And so we worked with Colliers to rework the budget and move a few things around. So we're confident that we'll be able to stay within the $250,000 that we were working with. One of the ways that we got there was to have Colliers work on an hourly basis for the first several months of the project, where they don't need to be boots on the ground, you know, from dawn to dusk on the project. And they agreed to do that, so that saved us quite a bit. We also put some cost into the bid for the architect, and so when we get those invoices from the architect after they've been selected and such, we expect to be able to manage to the 250. But I think I know there are several other building committees in the works for the town, and this was somewhat of a pilot program with Colliers coming on at an earlier stage than typical. I think the message is that they've added a tremendous amount of value to our project. I don't think we would have been nearly as far along and made the progress that we made in a short amount of time without them. So they add a tremendous amount of value, but I do think that having them work on an hourly basis for the first few months is a pretty good model to follow. So I wanted to share that with your board as well. Are there any questions about the numbers, the 250, or anything that you'd like to get into detail?
Not for me. College?
No, I think I'm happy you're
Okay.
still in.
Okay, great. The second thing I wanted to talk about is, in advance of going out with an RFP for architects, the building committee spent a fair amount of time trying to be very clear and define exactly what the project scope would entail. I think the charge that this board gave to the building committee was very clear, but we needed to add a little bit more detail to that. So we put together a 4-page document which was shared with you. It's also on the web page for the building committee on the town website. So that's available to the public. It really puts in layman's terms exactly what the committee is expecting, and we wanted to share that document with you. It was the cornerstone of what went into, instead of 4 pages for the summary, it was 17 pages for an RFP. So I wanted to make sure you saw that and had access to that information. The goals and objectives on this are consistent with the original charge, so I feel confident that the committee is moving in the right direction. The one area that I did want to bring to the attention of this board is that, in general, the committee was looking at one of two options: a renovation of the clubhouse or a replacement. And we are going to explore both options to understand what the costs and benefits or detriments of either option might be. But the committee expanded that a little bit, and so I wanted to make sure that you were aware of that. And what we said was, in the RFP for architects, we asked the architects to provide one of 4 options: a renovation in place, a replacement in the adjacent area, so maybe perhaps overlooking the golf course, better venue type thing, but not necessarily on the same footprint. third option was to actually move the clubhouse to the other side of the golf course altogether, up off of Hoyden's Lane. And we debated that for quite a bit, but felt like that was an option that we needed to also explore underneath the replacement option, because it did offer a lot of benefits. It would allow the golf operations to continue uninterrupted through the whole construction phase, which is going to be an important part of maintaining the revenues that are generated from the project. But also, a big part of the project, the building committee, was to either prioritize the project around the golf operations, but maintain optionality for non-golf activities at a later date, phase 2, phase 3, whatever. We've got a liaison from Parks and Rec on the building committee, and we're working with Parks and Rec to make sure that we're keeping our options open. By considering a move to the other side of the property, it would accomplish a couple of things. One, it would allow us to keep the golf operations uninterrupted through the whole project. But secondarily, it would bring the golf clubhouse closer to the driving range, which conservatively could double or triple the revenue from the golf driving range. And we'll do some more deep dive analysis on that, but we think that alone may be a big part of paying for the project. So it's certainly worthy of consideration. Third is that we have the driving range across the street. We've got the softball field next door. The town has property there that in the future, if they so choose to consider other options, the amenities of the clubhouse would be there, and it makes that option a lot more attractive. So I wanted you to be aware that that was on the table. The fourth option that we've put into the RFP is to ask each of the architects to let us know if we hadn't considered something that they feel like we should. So surprise us, kind of their dealer's choice, if you will. Not sure what that'll mean, but it's certainly something that we thought was worthwhile. Another thing that's important to note is we scaled back the RFP to not go through the schematic design phase in detail at this point as a means of managing expenses, but they're going to give us conceptual designs. Bids the RFP went out last week, April 11th. There was a site visit today where firms that were interested in the project could tour the site. There were, I think, 14 different firms that showed up today, so that's good.
Wow. That's a lot.
The bids will be due on May 3rd, and then with that, the building committee will meet several times, whittle down that list. We expect to have a short list of architects by mid-May. By the third week in May, we'll have interviews of the final 4. They'll provide presentations. And then by the end of May, we'll be in a position to make a selection.
Wow.
Interesting.
So we've been moving along quite rapidly, and I think time is of the essence, but we're doing it in a very diligent way.
You bet.
So I wanted you to be aware. That's why I also thought it was important to meet with this board today, because if we waited till May, we also want to provide the Board of Finance and RTM with updates as well in May.
Excellent. Questions? Go.
Question.
Yeah.
And thank you very much for the update. Back to option 3, can you help me better understand why the relocation of the clubhouse closer to the driving range would have such a positive impact on the driving range revenues?
Sure. Right now, in order for a golfer who plays at Smith Richardson to utilize the driving range, they have to get in their car. It's not accessible to walk or take a cart even to the driving range. Most golf courses will have a driving range within walking distance, right adjacent to, or take a cart to. That's not an option the way that we're currently configured. As a result, most golfers are coming to the golf course and not hitting golf balls before they play,
Okay.
which is some people use the driving range to practice, others use it to warm up before they start. There's no question that the number of range balls sold for our range relative to a Sterling Farms or a Tashua Knolls or some other places, or even just an industry average, we're well below.
You are?
Yeah.
Okay.
So if we
Okay.
were to move the driver range, down, that would work. But it's there for a reason. The topography just doesn't work very well to try and squeeze it in where we are. The other alternative is if we put the clubhouse closer to the driving range and share a parking lot, now you've got something where most people, we believe, and the Golf Commission believes, and the Golf Pro believes, would double or triple revenues.
Right, so the simple answer, it's for the golfer that wants to hit a bucket or two of balls before he goes onto the course,
Yep.
versus it driving in new business from the outside.
Correct.
Okay, I got it.
But it is capturing that audience that are already there. which is
Right.
good.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Well said. Thank you for the update.
Yeah,
Look forward
and
to
then
seeing
one
you.
last thing I'll leave you with is, that was the short-term schedule. This is what the owner's rep has prepared for us. Here you go, Chris.
Thank you.
And I'll leave those extras there. This is the more of a longer-term view of the project. And basically, we're gonna, as I mentioned, we're gonna be in a position to select an architect by the end of May. We'll go through the end of August working on a schematic designs and finalizing more of the concept. But really, I think the important milestones on here are, we get to the point where we're looking for budget dollars and approval on a project just after year end, in the winter. And then following all the permitting and other processes that we need to follow, we actually, if we stay on this schedule, we break ground pretty much just after Labor Day of next year, 2019. It's about a 10-month project, so we'll be able to hopefully wrap up by just after Memorial Day of 2020. So that's how the schedule maps out.
Okay, well, thank you. And I know you brought your vice chair,
Yeah.
Mr. Schwartz, along, just to
Hal, I
make
ran
sure
through
we're
that
on track.
quickly, but was there anything you
But-
wanted to add?
Yeah, I just want to compliment both of you in terms of looking at moving the facility and the idea of using that as a revenue generator. I know back when I could play golf, that generally you're getting there right before your tee time and not having this, and where you're right, normally, a normal course, you'd walk over, hit a bucket of balls, come back, be warmed up and play, because you have to get in your car, drive, do this, and because you tend not to want to hit the range first and miss your friends that you're playing golf with, you tend not to take the warm-up. So I think that's a tremendous revenue generator, and I appreciate the insight on the committee so early on in doing that. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Look forward to your next update.
All right, thank you.
All right, next up is to hear, consider, and approve an ECC Federal Engineering Consulting Service Agreement as recommended by the police chief. Chief, if you'd step to the mic and give us an update.
Sure. So thank you very much. Chief McCarthy is also here, as is Captain Smith, as you talked about earlier with the recognition. Just by way of a history, the town of Fairfield has a consolidated ECC map, meaning that our Emergency Communications Center handles both fire and police. That is not the case in all towns. However, in Fairfield, back in 1990 or 1991, we consolidated, taking a separate police dispatch center and a separate fire dispatch center, and we made it into one. It currently operates in the basement of the police department, dispatching 911 calls and all calls for service for fire, police, and EMS. We have over time talked and discussed about the ideal potential of moving that 911 center out of the basement as it sits in the flood zone, and for a variety of other reasons. In discussion that Chief McCarthy and I had, as well as the fire chief and police chief from Westport, we've discussed the potential for consolidating services and combining dispatch centers, both Westport and Fairfield. They are in the process of combining fire and police. They still dispatch separately, so we felt it was a good opportunity to really, for a variety of reasons, budget constraints and other issues, look to combine our dispatch center. Provide service, 911 service, to both Fairfield and Westport out of one center. That's a complicated process. It involves not only budget, but resources and functionality of how that can occur. And in order to do that properly, we felt the need to have a consultant come in and do that for us. Westport is a little ahead of us in that they were already looking to consolidate, so they decided to take the lead on an RFP for a consultant. So they put out an RFP for a consultant and selected a consultant that we in the town of Fairfield have agreed to pay for half of that consultant. And again, the consultant work is really to find out what the calls for service are in Westport, how Westport operates and how Fairfield operates, and then look to build our center based upon the consultant's efforts. The consultant that we selected, or that Westport and we have agreed to, was Federal Engineering. Federal Engineering is a consultant that is no stranger to the state of Connecticut. If you recall, several years ago, the state of Connecticut looked to consolidate some of their state police dispatch centers, and they came in and they were the ones that did that. So they are familiar with the way the state operates, and we certainly think that will be helpful with us also.
A couple quick points, just to, one, the dollars for this have already been approved. We did that a couple months back, as I remember correctly.
They have.
So there's no additional dollars in play. This is just the agreement that we're
Correct.
coming through with.
Correct.
And in fact, we're looking at consolidating this and moving it up to Sacred Heart Campus. Now, as you said, there's a lot of details to go through, but the two big pieces for the consultant was, one, to help us both merge and move to there, but then also help us understand how you operate that. Because this is the first one in Connecticut where these have been merged. There are a couple of consolidated 911 call centers, but they were set up that way right from the start for some of the smaller towns in the Northeast or Northwest. But this is the first time in the history of the state of Connecticut we are moving to merge these as a way of gaining operational efficiencies, and you pointed out, hopefully some budget efficiencies
Correct.
as we move forward.
Yes.
I just want to kind of set the stage for
Yeah,
that as we go
absolutely.
through.
Yes.
Any comments or questions from my colleagues?
No, thank you, Chief. Thanks for doing all
I'm
the
good,
work.
thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We have, let's see, to hear, consider, and approve. May I have a motion to accept?
Make a motion?
A second.
Second.
Any further discussion? Any comments from the public? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Chief, thank you.
Thanks.
Next up, item 10, from the Director of Solid Waste and Recycling, and this does require RTM approval, to hear, consider, and approve the Greater Bridgeport Recycling, Regional Recycling Interlocal Agreement. That's a mouthful. Mr. Bowman, Mr. Zabruski, will you please fill us in?
All right, the agreement will replace the original agreement, which was executed in 1989. Right now, we have a contract with Winter Brothers, which expires in June 2018, and they gave us an option to renew. We need the new regional agreement to continue in existence.
The old agreement will expire in December of this year, so the commission cannot sign a 1 or 2 or 3 year contract
Yeah.
unless it's renewed by the towns. So all the towns have renewed except us at this point, so we're the last ones in there.
Okay. Any comments from the board?
Kevin? No, I'm good for now.
All right. And we've had a chance to talk about this, so thank you for bringing us before this. Let's see, this is to consider here, consider, and approve. May I have a motion to accept?
Make a motion?
Second.
Second.
All right, that's before us. Any comments from the public? Seeing none, back before the board. All in favor?
Aye.
Gentlemen, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Don't worry.
All right, next up, also from the Director of Public Works, to hear, consider, and act upon the following resolution as recommended by the Director. Resolved that a solar panel power purchase agreement between the Town of Fairfield and Skyview Fairfield LLC for the purpose of erecting a photovoltaic electric generation system on the roof of Penfield Pavilion located at 323 Fairfield Beach Road for the sole benefit of Penfield Pavilion, and the term of the agreement being 20 years, be and hereby is approved. May I have a motion to accept?
Make a motion?
A second?
Second?
Okay, the item is now before us. We've discussed something like this in the
Yes,
past.
this has been around for a year or two, and there were concerns that the solar was too extensive, people would see it from the neighborhood and complain about it. So we went back and redid it, so it's only on the roof and cannot be seen, on the roof that's, just like, it's invisible from the surrounding area. We also put feelers out to all the neighborhood groups, showed them, what we were doing here, and there was no objection to doing it this way. So we came back, and that particular solar from the LREX expired, so they had to get a new one. So this is the new one. So it's been going for 3 years. Yeah.
Okay,
Were we
Mr. Trinet?
getting cheaper than 11 cents in the past?
Yeah, but what's happened as the bidding goes out over the years, it's, the amount of money available to support this is getting less and less, so the prices are going up and up.
All right, so what was our low number?
We've had a low of 7 cents on the roof, yeah.
Yeah.
Also, if it's large enough, you get a lower number, too.
Right.
These are small. And the one, all right, that's just the,
Okay. So you say it's 19 cents a kilowatt right now? This will save us 8 cents a kilowatt
Yeah.
moving forward.
so that's still a good savings, yeah.
But that fluctuates.
Well, annually, right?
Yeah.
Both on UI's rates going up and what we buy on the open market, that can go up or down, too.
Do you ever think we're gonna get in a situation where it drops below 11 cents?
No.
Kilowatts again?
Oh, that'll never happen, no.
Okay.
I mean, I think we're paying UI 11 cents now, just for their part of it. The UI's costs are dramatically increased for demand charges. It's just, it's incredible. You know, it used to be, generation was twice distribution and transmission. Now it's the other way around.
Mr. Conant?
Please, you mentioned neighborhood groups. Can you just elaborate a little bit more about what that process was, and what you went through, who you met with, and what their reactions
Well,
were?
basically what I did, we took the proposal, including the drawings of what it was, and emailed it out to all the neighborhood groups, asked them for their opinion, do they want to meet, and none of them wanted to meet. Everybody was happy with what they saw, so there was no meetings that were available. So I forget the name, there's like 4 neighborhood groups down there, Fairfield Beach Road
Right.
Association. So they all received it, and all, there was no negative comments or requests for a meeting once they saw it.
Okay, so they all received it, and there were no negative emails or comments or requests for meetings back?
That's correct.
Okay.
And just to confirm, what you're saying now is the way this is going to be installed, it's not visible from the road.
That's correct.
Mhm.
That's why it's smaller than the original. We cut it back.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Any comments from the public? Seeing none, back to the board. Are we ready to vote?
Mm-hmm.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Mr. Bowman, thank you. Next up, also from the Director of Public Works, to hear, consider, and act upon the following resolution as recommended by the Director of Public Works. Resolved that a solar panel purchase agreement between the Town of Fairfield and Skyview Fairfield LLC for the purpose of erecting a photovoltaic electric generation system on the roof of the Regional Fire Training Facility located at 51 Rod Highway for the sole benefit of the Regional Fire Training Facility, and the term of the agreement being 20 years be and hereby is approved. May I have a motion to accept?
Make a motion.
A second. Second. Mr. Bowman?
This is also one we've had for a while, and it expired because it took so long to build the building. They went back and got another approval. This one we had to reduce in size because the electric service of the building isn't capable of accepting a larger solar. And we were going to have one on the roof, one in the parking lot. Fire, you want to get as big as possible. The fire department wanted it too, for obvious reasons. This is the largest one you can that can be put on that system with the power requirements that are in the building. You just won't accept a larger system. And I'm not an electrician, but I can't figure. We went through that, and that's just the way it is.
All right. Since the state has cut back training for, or expenses and subsidies for regional fire training facilities and support, how much will this save the center in terms of power costs a year? Do you have that?
Yeah, it's say 46,000 times 11 is what, about $7,000? I forget. 46,000 times 0.11. Who has a calculator?
So it's plus 10% then, right?
Yeah. So it's, well, I know it's roughly half, because they're using about 100,000 kilowatt hours a year. This is providing 46,000, so it'll provide half the expense for electricity.
Okay, but we don't know what that dollar amount is offhand. Fire chief is not here, okay.
All right, so it's 100.
Well, it's 46,000 times 11 cents. So that's
$5 grand.
$5 grand.
Yeah.
Okay.
5 out of 10, let's say. 5 out of 11. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Very
So-
good. Any questions from the board?
Yeah, just back, you just mentioned it covers how much of the electricity, or the kilowatts for a year?
It's like 45–50%. We don't have a full year's experience, so it's hard to really say.
Right. But is that a limiter? Is that the limiter for having it be this size that you mentioned before, or are they not related?
They're not related,
They're
no.
not related at all?
No, it was the electric service into the buildings was unable to accept a larger load.
Hmm. So Okay.
That's the only, that was the, we could go, ideally, you design the 75 or 80% of the building.
Exactly.
So
Right.
you just can't do that. You know, we tried and it didn't work.
Did you look at maybe replacing that component that is the
Well, that's,
limiter?
you're talking about another $30,000-$40,000. That's why we didn't do it. It's not cheap.
And what would that part or that service be again? That would need to be replaced?
I don't even know the names of these things. I forgot. We had electricians look at it. It's just an impossible situation. I don't know electrical engineering at all, so.
No, because I'm just wondering if there was a way to make an investment in the building to accept more kilowatts.
Well, we
Then
could-
maybe you could return that investment over a short period of time and make it a win.
Well,
Well,
we
he
could.
said $30,000 to $40,000.
Right.
So for $40,000, we're only saving $5,000 a year. That's a 10-year plus
Yeah,
payback.
Okay.
I mean, it could be looked at. I mean, we could get a look at it and have a second facility or in the parking lot. Then we can look at the cost and payback. It's not impossible. We have a lot of buildings with two solar on there. Fairfield Woods School's gonna have 3. So it's not impossible.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
All right, any comments?
I'm all set, thanks.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Ed, thank you. We did move this and
Yep, we
second
did.
it, right?
We did.
All right, any comments from the public? Seeing none, back to the board. Are we ready to vote?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you. All right, next up, also from the Director of Public Works, and this is going to require Board of Finance and RTM approval. To hear, consider, and adopt a bond resolution entitled, "A Resolution Appropriating an Additional $64,925 for costs associated with the design of Duck Farm Road Bridge over the Mill River, and authorizing the issuance of bonds to finance such appropriation as recommended by the Director of Public Works." May I have a motion to accept?
Make a motion.
A second?
Second.
All right, Mr. Hurley, fill us in.
Okay. Good evening, I'm Bill Hurley, Fairfield Engineering Manager, and I'm here tonight on behalf of the Director of Public Works. Currently, the town has $343,000 in the account for the design of the Duck Farm Bridge. After 9 months of negotiation between the town, the consultant, and the DOT, an agreement of scope of services and fee proposal has been reached. Although the agreement with the consultant is for only $328,000, including the direct costs, the agreement that the state provided, which they call a project authorization letter, so the APAL agreement with the state calls for a 10% extra work contingency, review of shop drawings, which won't even occur until construction phase, and another 10% extra work allowance to prevent the project from going ever back to the feds for additional funding. Therefore, the Engineering Department and Public Works is requesting an additional $64,000 to cover the potential contingencies and extra work for the design of the bridge. The funding may or may not be expended, and any extra work is usually has to be proposed by the consultant in writing and must be formally approved by the town and by the Department of Transportation prior to any commencement of that additional work. Of that 64,000, the exact number is 64,925. For the potential extra work and contingencies will be reimbursed at 80% of the approved expenditures as part of the federal local bridge program, thereby potentially costing the town up to an additional $12,985 for the extreme worst-case scenario. I do have some, in the backup, I do have the original agreement and the number with the consultant, and I do have, we have the PAL attachment, and you can see in line A, they already included their 10% contingency, and then in line C, they added the other 10%. I double-checked with the state to make sure that that wasn't an error, and in response, basically, it is a double contingency that the DOT has been doing as a means of providing extra funds to the agreement so that the need for a later supplemental agreement is less likely. So basically, in a whole nutshell, is to make it a lot easier for the state so they don't have to go back. They're making me or the Public Works go back to the town to ask for additional monies to make the PAL agreement and the consultant agreement the same, basically. So it's very confusing, but
Yeah.
that's the way the state does things.
I say, Bill, thank you very
Sure.
much. Your explanation, I understood.
Oh, good.
I actually followed it, believe it or not, and I've dealt with something similar in the town I work in. So I understand it, and it's just more of a burden they're passing to the towns. We see it in almost every department, soon to be every department, coming this way. But the thing I would highlight is what you said, the 80% reimbursement of the $64,000 puts worst-case scenario for the town to be out $12,000.
Right, and that would be highly
Right.
unlikely, that we would use both
Both
contingencies.
both buckets of 10.
Right.
Right. I'm good. I good.
All right. And then again, we have to approve this because we get reimbursed for this. So we have to approve the expenditure in order, we have to be authorized to do the work before we can get reimbursed, even if we don't use the full 64,000.
Right.
Because that's what we're asked to do. We have
And
to
typically-
authorize.
Typically, Fairfield likes to have the consultant agreements match what the state agreement is, that way everybody's on the same page. And if we need it, we'll have it, and if not,
We don't spend
we
it.
don't ever spend it.
So this is not a guarantee we'll spend it, it's merely an authorization to spend it if need be.
That's correct.
Okay, very good. Any comments from the public? Seeing none, back to the board. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Mr. Hurley, thank you very much.
All right, thank you, and I'm glad you understood that. It's confusing. Thank you.
Next up, item 14, from the Director of Information Technology, and this requires Board of Finance and RTM approval. To hear, consider, and adopt a bond resolution entitled, "A Resolution Appropriating $866,818 for the costs associated with the acquisition and installation of a town-wide telephone system and authorizing the issuance of bonds to finance such appropriation as recommended by the Director of Information Technology." May I have a motion to accept? A second?
Second.
All right.
Hello.
All right.
Thank you. We have the directors of
Both
information
directors of
technology.
IT for the
Welcome.
town and the school system. Thank you both for coming. Who wants to take the lead in stepping us through this?
They voted me in as the one with the longevity of the project. We are pleased to ask you to fund a replacement phone system for both the town and the Board of Education. The existing system is over 20 years old. It currently does not have parts available. The company that would have parts available to us went bankrupt in 2009. The voicemail system is somewhat jury-rigged to continue to operate and has limited capacity. So in the case of emergencies such as Storm Sandy, it created some issues in being able to respond to the constituency. We went through a long RFP evaluation process. It actually took over a year. Part of that process included a network assessment for both the town and the Board of Education to ensure that we knew what we needed to do to be ready for when we go forward with the project. What you see in front of you primarily does not include any of that network adjustment activity. Dave and I have included that in our operating budgets. As we go forward, we gave you a lot of material to go through. I don't know how far you got with it. We're more than happy to answer questions. The selection that we made was a Cisco solution offered by Total Communications. They were the winning bidder out of, I think it was 16 or 17 submissions that we went through. We attempted to be very open-minded about what process or what system we accepted. We asked for anything anybody could come up with, whether it was a hosted solution by the vendor, an on-premise solution, or a hybrid. Because we felt that we wanted to see what the options were to us and what the cost overall over a 7-year period for the town would be. In the end, we selected Total for a variety of reasons. One is the Cisco solution. Cisco is a leader in the field and have been for 15 or 20 years. They continue to be in the top quadrant with Gartner. They offered the best survivability function. In other words, if we lose power or systems on the Ethernet system that we have, there's a way for basic services to continue. We like their proposal on that. So they have the best survivability plan. There are some benefits to the town in the idea that we can consolidate the number of phone lines that we actually subscribe to on a monthly basis. We can do a lot of the work that we currently have to use outside vendors for in-house. These systems are much easier to basically unplug something, plug another device in, and you're on your own. So moves, adds, and changes don't require the low voltage wiring capability that we need with our current system. So I'd say that in the end, we picked a leading edge and great system, but not a bleeding edge system that fit the desired need. The dollar value that the bond request includes the 800, I think it's 86,000. Part of that includes the quoted amount from the vendor, including additional funds to help with truing up. In other words, a lot of our numbers were based on estimates. There's a contingency for cabling for any additional lines that need to be run. There are some interface work that needs to be done for police and fire and ECC systems and the school system intercom system. There's some disposal costs for the old system, and there's some reconfiguration requirements for our wide area network that we would contract out for. And at that, I'll let you ask any questions you might have.
Any comments from the board?
Well, this is definitely something I support. It saves us money all over the long run. Having over 1,000 Centrix lines is completely outdated and a waste of money at this point. I didn't realize the firm we had went bankrupt in 2009, so I think we've been lucky for the last 8 years that we haven't had a major crash. So this is something timely. And we put together a good proposal here.
I have to say we.
Yeah, you definitely did. It's fantastic. I think it's timely that we get it done, and it looks like a big scary number up front, but it will save us money over the long run, so it's something I definitely support. Thank you.
Mr. Kiley?
Yeah, just thank you very much. It is a great proposal. Can you talk a little bit about the voicemail and the conferencing, the conference call options that the new system will have?
Yes, one of the features that we asked for was the ability to integrate voicemail with email. So you get a voicemail message, a copy of it goes to your email. You can listen to it on your phone, your computer, whatever. If you delete it from your email, it'll automatically delete it from your voicemail as well. So we look at that as a way to check your voicemail more easily. It's more efficient. The other thing that we lack in our current system is our current system doesn't have an indicator on it to let you know when you have a voicemail. So I've only been in town for a year or so now, but I've developed a case of tennis elbow.
Checking your
because
voicemail.
You have to pick up, listen for the stutter dial to see if you had a voicemail. And when you're speaking on the phone, you hang up. Then you got to pick it up again to see if anybody left you a voicemail while you were on the phone. I missed that feature from my previous life. The new phones will have an indicator light that's very obvious. I've unfortunately at times not returned a phone call because I didn't realize I had a voicemail sitting there. So we hope to be more responsive to our constituents and parents by getting back to them in a more timely fashion by not having those types of oversights.
Excellent. So that's
conferencing, yes. Yeah. The system does also offer a conferencing capability. You can make multiple calls and tie everybody together. We currently use we use AT&T right now. We dial into an outside bridge and we pay monthly for that kind of service. This system will do that on a small scale.
Okay, so you have an internal conferencing system for up to like 10 or 20 lines or something?
I think it's 50.
Yeah, I think
Is
it's
it 50?
quite a large number,
That's
yes,
nice. Yeah, mine's 25, and sometimes we get close to it. And the Cisco product is a good product.
Yes,
it really
they're the
is.
leader in the business.
They really
have
are.
been for a long time.
Well, this will be quite an improvement for everyone's efficiency across both organizations and bring both organizations together, which has been an IT goal for a few years. Yeah, that's right. So thank you.
All right, and just to confirm, this is for the town and the Board of Ed.
That's correct.
This is $888,000 and change. That's one considerably lower than some numbers that were bounced around a few years back, which were north of $2 million on doing this. So, one, thank you for doing the work to get it down.
We did have some proposals that were in the $2 million range, but we felt this was more than adequate.
All right. And then, if I'm reading here correctly on page 8, does this say we're saving $49,000 and change each year?
Approximately.
Over what we're spending
That's
right
our
now?
estimate, yes. Right now, we are paying for almost 1,000 centric lines.
Yeah.
At business rates. And the way a voice over IP system works is you consolidate and share just a few data circuits for all the phones in town. Most of the 1,000 lines are idle most of the time. They're only in use on the old system while you're on the phone. Where with the new system, we share a line. So as long as we don't have more than 150 simultaneous phone calls at one moment.
Your pipeline's big
Our
enough.
pipeline's big enough. And the pipeline's adjustable. If we did find that we were
Right.
too large or too small, we can
Right.
adjust it up
It's
or
also
down.
gonna help us on toll calls, because believe it or not, we're still under, if everybody remembers their old phone bills, we still are paying for interstate, as
That's
well as,
insane.
as
Yeah.
intrastate as well as interstate long distance.
Right,
And
right.
those numbers will obviously go
Right.
down, because you don't have that with the voice over IP
A
system.
number of minutes are included in those big circuits that we're
Right,
buying.
exactly.
The-
I'm
ahead.
sorry. I had a question back on the pipeline. What is the failover of the backup? I mean, should that main pipe go?
Well, we're gonna have 3 pipes going
Okay,
to
those
three
three.
different, 3 different locations in town. So we'll have system survivability to the outside world.
Yeah.
But then we also requested site survivability at every site. So there will be some old-fashioned lines still at each site. And if the system goes down or there's a network problem, we want at least a minimal amount of service to be available for an incoming or outgoing call to a school, a fire station, the police department, whatever. So
Right.
we requested both system survivability and site survivability in the design.
Right, so that's like the old-fashioned copper line to call 911 if you needed to.
We're
If
gonna
the
get a
system-
call out even
the-
if the network goes down or the whatever, we still have that old-fashioned connection to the phone company
Right,
in an emergency.
good. Excellent.
Talk to us a little bit about Storm Sandy when it comes again. And a number of our residents and business, when they lost power, lost their phone systems. How does this work, and how are we protected against that?
Buildings that don't have power, we're not gonna be in them anyway. I mean, if this building lost power and if the generator failed or whatever, we're not gonna worry about the phones in this building working for more than 20 minutes because we're gonna have to clear out. But due to the 3 lines to 3 different locations, our hope is that we don't have this building and the Fire Station 1 and the Board of Education all without power. In other words, there will be some part of the network that has power that will provide the service to the remaining surviving
There's
sites.
basically failover between the 3 sites.
Right.
Yeah.
So as long as not all 3 of them go down, we'll have ability to call out.
And technically, even if they all went down, we would have that last lifeline
right, true.
connectivity that we
Right.
talked about at the sites that are still live.
Yeah,
Okay.
copper lines.
Public safety is going to be my next question, but given our 911 centers in the police building, why did you pick the fire building? How does that, how'd that work?
Well, we didn't have the new data center approved for the police department. We may switch that over to the police department now that
The
we are
fire
putting a
fire
data
station
center
1
in the
currently
second
is the
floor.
demarcation point for both police and fire. Everything's on the second floor. of the
Everything
fire
goes through the fire
So
department.
that was the natural location when we were building this before the approval to move that data center over to the police department. So we'll probably
So we'll
coordinate
probably
those.
we'll probably make that change
Yeah.
and switch it to the police station.
Okay. And then what's the impact on the fire station if you do that? I mean, don't we
There's a
need
line
both up?
between the 2 systems.
Okay.
A private line.
All right. And then, this is a bonding resolution. What term are we bonding this over? What's the life of this? There's CFOs in the back of the room if you want to
We'll
refer
look at
to
the
him.
CFO. Yeah, 10 years would, I think, be reasonable.
Is that, what is the useful life in your opinion?
We
Yeah,
were-
we were just debating this afternoon.
Good time.
Okay. The voice over IP systems likely won't have the life that our current system did, which was 23 years. The telephones are network-based devices.
That's
They're
good
not
news.
Well, yes. However, Cisco has a history of supporting a given phone model or whatever for more than 10 years. So we believe that the system in general will go 10 years. We may have to do minor upgrades and replacements, maybe at the 7-ish year mark.
Yeah.
Because the system does rely on basically computer servers, and there's a limit to how long a computer server will last. We don't see the life of the computer server as being a load change. We're not going to increase, we're not going to put a lot more phones in town. We're not going to increase the strain on the servers that we have to upgrade them for power. But they are electrical devices with fans and power supplies, including systems in them. And 7 years is kind of long for a server in a data center, but for a phone system, we figured that's about where we might have to replace some of the components to keep the system going.
Yeah, average lifespan of a normal server is about 5 years.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and, you know, major critical systems are 3, but that's because you end up putting them as backup systems and that sort of thing, and putting the new stuff on
In-
in the 3rd year.
In
So,
front of it, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so, and we feel that we can keep things up to date through the operating budget, rather than coming back and asking for, you know, a large
We
capital
don't
expenditure.
expect to come back and buy another phone system in
Yeah.
7 years. in other words.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that makes sense. The 3 and the 5 makes sense. And as far as the handsets go, those Cisco handsets are good for well over 5 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
I'm on 6, 7, 8 years. I've got 2 or 3 different versions that we've purchased over time, and they're still all compatible, and they still all
Yeah.
work, and they're very sturdy phones.
Yes.
And they handle, even today's phones handle my older system or vice versa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that I would ask you to go back and take a look at that with our CFO. Our guideline is obviously that we're not going to bond something longer than its useful life. The numbers you're talking about are less than 10 years. So if we could take a look at the components of this and make sure that we're able to follow that guideline. I'm sure this question will come up again in front of other boards. So
Understood.
it would be helpful to get that. Any further comments from
No,
the board?
great job.
No, all set. Thank you.
All right. Any comments from the public? Seeing none, back to the board. This has been around for quite a while, and it's great to see it finally get here. Are we ready to vote?
Yes.
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right.
All right.
Next up. This is a superintendent of schools, item 15. This also requires the RTM approval. All right, and just, these are the 3 standard paragraphs we have approved in past on projects. I'm going to ask that we move and second this, but I believe this is because we're only allowed so many years in between, so we have to, in essence, renew our vows with the state in order to get this done. Has a very nuptial type ring to it, doesn't it? Sorry, guys, I'm in that mode. So,
I can't explain it any better.
Yeah.
so let me just read this off and get this before us. To hear, consider, and act upon the following resolution as requested by the superintendent of schools. Resolved that the town of Fairfield authorizes the town of Fairfield's Board of Education to apply to the Commissioner of Education to accept or reject a grant for security infrastructure projects at Fairfield Ludlow High School and Fairfield Ward High School. And further resolved that the School Safety and Security Building Committee is hereby established as the building committee with regard to the security and infrastructure projects at Fairfield Ludlow High School and Fairfield Ward High School. And further resolved that the town of Fairfield hereby authorizes at least the preparation of schematic drawings and outline specifications for the security infrastructure projects at Fairfield Ludlow High School and Fairfield Ward High School. May I have a motion to accept?
Make a motion.
A second.
Second.
Thank you. That item is now before us.
Good
Mr.
afternoon.
Morabito.
Sal Morabito, Manager, Construction, Security, and Safety for Fairfield Schools. Thank you for that. This is a renewal of 3 resolutions that had been previously passed for the security projects at the schools other than the 2 high schools. The state changed the format. The wording is just slightly different. The previous resolution was too old to make the new filings for Ward High School and Ludlow High School. So it's
For the
same thing,
reimbursement
for the
process.
reimbursement process. And it's a renewal of vows, as you said.
All right, any comments from the board?
No.
All right. Any comments from the public? Seeing none, back to the board. Are we ready to vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Next up, to hear and consider a charge for the Roger Sherman Elementary School. That's in your package, gentlemen. This is not down for a vote. we're looking at doing in a few more cases going forward is to present this before the board on one meeting and then bring it back for a vote on the second meeting. That
Right.
gives both the public time to hear it, it gives us time to review it, think through what we need to do, so any comments, changes we can make at the next meeting when we vote. So we don't need to spend much time on this unless you have some specific questions. This is for the Roger Sherman $3.2 million project.
Yep.
So, okay to move on?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. All right, next up, Mill Hill Building Project Review and Discussion. And if I might set this up a little bit, kind of review where we are. It's kind of how did we get here? This project request came from the Board of Ed to the Board of Selectmen and then the Board of Finance. At the presentation of the Board of Finance, there were multiple scenarios brought up and options for a 378, a 441, and a 504 school. Because those edits were made in the bond resolution, that is a substantial change. Given that, it comes back to the Board of Selectmen. We have been given an ed spec that talks about 504, yet we've heard at many of these presentations, and I know some of us, and I personally had a chance to watch the Fair TV On Demand Board of Finance meeting, and heard it stated that 441 might be acceptable. There was discussion of overcrowding and racial imbalance, and I think redistricting was a word that was used a whole lot in terms of how to take advantage of the Mill Hill school and the building. There was also questions about what is the overall plan for overcrowding and racial imbalance, and why 504 at Mill Hill, given there have been some lower capacities proposed for this school in the past, and kind of how do we get comfortable with what the best plan is for this. So those were some of the questions kind of we have before us, and that's why we scheduled this as a discussion with the Board of Ed superintendent, so we could kind of get some of these questions out, not put the pressure on the Board of Ed to answer all these since the Board of Finance meeting, but definitely we are going to need these questions answered. I also want to point out that Dr. Jones was good enough to send us a memo that we didn't get this till about 4 o'clock or so this afternoon. I'm not sure my colleagues
I've
have
not
had a
seen it.
chance. It
No.
should be in your packet, Kevin.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's on your email for sure.
Okay.
So there's some of that happened, but since we plan on this being a discussion, since we plan on kind of clarifying our questions and giving some guidance to the Board of Ed, so they can give us some guidance back as to what how to move forward with this project. I think the other point I will make, I think most folks that have followed this understand it, but there's no question in any, I'm going to say, elected official or town or Board of Ed official that I've talked to that doesn't support the renovation at Mill Hill. What the discussion or questions are centering around is how big do we make the school, and how is that school facility utilized to support the overall educational plan for the town. We've got PowerPoint and presentations on school facilities and 10-year enrollments, and elementary school facilities and scenario planning. We've got the packet from here, and we have the memo from Dr. Jones. So with that as a setup, if it's okay, I would like to ask Dr. Jones to kind of address us next.
Thank you. Tony Jones, School Superintendent. And I first of all want to apologize that you did get the memo late today. Most of our team was not working last week because they take vacation days because it's spring break and we're not in school. So we were working on this the last 2 days feverishly for you. In this memo, basically, I've tried to just outline 8 different points for you that I think are just informational to make sure that if there's any misunderstanding in the community or from Board of Finance or Board of Selectmen, we're answering some of those questions. The first one, obviously I'm not going to read all of this to you, but it just talks to the research that is available and why the board is committed to community schools that are smaller schools. We don't want to take two schools and have a mega campus of 800 or 900 students. And research supports the system that we have in Fairfield and that we've had for many, many years. It actually shows higher student achievement by having this school size. It does allow families to be greater involved in the school as well as collaboration. But again, you can read those components. I think that's probably, most people understand that and really value the smaller schools in Fairfield. I think number two is probably an area that very few people really do understand when we talk about the difference between a 378, 441, or 504. And to kind of make it simplistic, I put the top three, the schools that are at the top, Mill Hill, Dwight, and Jennings, are all right now functional capacity of 378. Now, when you go across to that third column and you look at the cafeteria size, if you don't do anything at Mill Hill, their cafeteria is not even big enough for a 378. So whether you build a 378 or a 504, it doesn't change the intent of what's going to happen there for a large core space at Mill Hill. The stage is what will most likely be removed in order to expand that space to be large enough, whether it's 378 or 504, and that is the space that's available. So it's, you know, it's not in the ed spec to bump out a huge wall and go out towards the playground. That's the space that's available that we're working with in the renovation. And again, that's regardless of which size building. So you don't get cost savings because you all of a sudden are going to go from a 378 to a 504. The other area that is important to note is the kitchen. The kitchen is 865 square feet. It's very small. When you look at our other two buildings, let alone the 504s that are listed below, but they're both at 1,200, 1,500. Whether it's a 378 or a 504, the kitchen expansion needs to happen so the building can function the way that it's intended to function. Their library media center, you can see, is actually a nice size. It's not in the ed spec to expand that. So that doesn't change. There's no cost savings there. The gym, even when we did our walkthroughs with the Board of Finance, who all came and walked around, and several of you as well, we noted that the gym is actually a pretty nice size. For the rest of the building, that's really small. We're not planning any expansion there, other than we've got to bump out to get the stage in there. But the actual gym for children is staying the same. So regardless of whether it's a 378 or a 504 or a 441, those core spaces need to happen, and they are not going to change in their size. And I do think there's a lot of misunderstanding about that. People think, oh, we could save several $1 million because you would need to expand those spaces. And there's some more detail below that if you want to take the time this evening or whenever to read that. And now let me point out number 3, which is the next page, because I think, again, this is an area that a lot of people probably think you're going to get cost savings but going from 378 to a 504, and you are not. What I've listed here for you are the number of rooms required for a 378, 441, or 504. And although it looks really repetitive, it is, because it doesn't change. If we have 378 children, we still need a psychologist, a space for them. We still need the same number of specialty spaces. One thing I did add for you is the way that we use staff effectively. If you read just what's underneath that statement, sometimes we'll have a reading specialist who might be 0.6. They're not quite full-time because we share them between 2 buildings. They need space in both buildings to work with children. So those spaces don't change either. You don't get any cost savings in looking at those additional spaces.
So number 3, all of these would be add-ons? We don't have any of those at Mill Hill currently?
No, some of these are actually, what the architect will do, just like they did at Holland Hill, they go in and look at the building. They're going to look at anything that is existing small space now. You know, which one of these can you check off? If there's an art room now and it can still be used for art, they'll check that off. They literally work through all of these. But what this is saying is that if you made a decision or the board, brought an ed spec forward that was 378 or 441, it doesn't save any of those spaces.
How many kids are currently at Mill Hill?
Mill Hill, as of April, yes, 350.
Okay.
And we'll get to that in just a minute.
Could I follow up on Chris's question?
Yeah.
So this is what you would need under each of these scenarios. could you also, I think what would also be helpful is because there's a lot of small spaces in this building that aren't adequate to provide the service that we provide in our typical elementary schools today. So we need to expand those rooms. So can you kind of map us, maybe not here, but map us from what we have to one of these columns, right? Like there's two of these rooms that we're using for two different purposes today, but neither one are big enough to serve the sole purpose in our typical school. So we would need to map those two to one of these and then add another one to compensate for the loss of the other smaller space. Because there is kind of there's a lot of different size rooms.
We know that the building is short about 10 small spaces in and around the building. Part of the difficulty with doing that is that's architectural work, because what we want them to go in and do is, we may have a small space right now, for instance, that really is a closet. I mean, we have one or two spaces like that in Mill Hill, but that doesn't mean that they can't put natural light, knock a window out, actually convert that, where if you look at, for instance, Osborne Hill, at the end of their hall, what used to be a closet is a beautiful teaching space, because when they renovated, they, made that adjustment. So that would be a hard thing for me to do. I could say they have, which Malone McBroom has said that they have X amount of small spaces, here's how many they're short. On number 4, that is just really looking at, so what is the difference between a 378, 441, or a 24? And I won't read number A to you, but I'll flip the page and just point out B, because if we actually reduced that school to what we're considering a 378, that would be a smaller space than what they have right now, because you have to remember they have 5 trailer classrooms outside.
Could you just explain that? We've got 350 students, and we're using 23 classrooms right now?
Well, let me just say, here's another thing about Mill Hill, for instance. Like, if you think about a 378, and when you talk about capacity of a building, we look at it from classroom space available. There are people who want to calculate if a building is built for 378 and Mill Hill has 350, people want to say, oh, there's 28 seats there you can use. The reality is at Mill Hill, every classroom, we have 18. If we did new construction for $22 million and we built it for 378 students, that would be 18 general ed classrooms. That's what they have right now. They have 3 sections on every grade level. So you'd have no expansion for classroom expansion.
Actually, I was trying to clarify what's said here.
Okay, sorry.
It said we have 23 general classroom instruction. That's
Are you on
18
the
I'm on
A?
4A.
Okay.
Bottom of the page, it says 18 classrooms plus 5 portables, that's 23 instruction classrooms. Are we using all 23 instructional classrooms?
They are using everything except the one classroom we showed, which they're actually using it for OTPT. The really old trailer doesn't have a general education, but their full-size classrooms are being used for things like special education, which Mr. Kiley was referencing. They don't have space. They're MST, they're reading specialists. Some of them are divided, and they've got bookcases down the center in order to find those small spaces in the building.
Right.
Otherwise, they'd be out in the hall.
Okay, so we're not using these 23 classrooms as classrooms.
We use every classroom in the building for what we need instructionally. Right now, they have 18 classrooms that are actually, there are 18 spaces that you need for general education today, if that makes sense.
Yeah, this seems to imply that we're you remodel it, we're using all this. In fact, I'm not sure what this is telling us when it's all done, because if we're not using them as classrooms, we're using them for the other spaces that we don't have up above. I'm not sure what the point of that phrase is, or that sentence. What's supposed to be my takeaway from that?
Well, I think the takeaway is that right now, if you're just looking at X amount of large-sized classrooms, it's 483 is what the capacity would be. Just a large-sized classroom, because you have 5 of them outside in trailers, but that's not what we want. We want those to go away.
Right, but you want the classrooms rebuilt in bricks and mortar, but what you're saying is because you need the other spaces, the non-general classroom space, the capacity is not 483.
They will, what the architect will do is those rooms right now that are being used for MST and special education that are full-size classroom, you want them to recapture those for gen ed classrooms.
Oh, yeah, I'm just not, and I don't mean to belabor it, I really am not clear on what the takeaway is or why that's there, but.
I can follow up with you.
Okay, that certainly. Didn't mean to sidetrack us.
No, you're fine.
Can you quickly go back to the calculation you just did? It was 23 times today's capacity? What did you say?
Well, right now, you're talking about the 18 classrooms?
Mhm.
Yeah, right now we have 350 students in that building.
Well, that I know, right.
Right, but it's 3 sections. So when you have 3 sections on each grade level, that's what you would need at least for 378. Where 504 is 4 sections on each grade level.
No, that I got, but you just quoted another number, was 4 something, which was
Oh, it's-
something times something.
It's
I didn't-
483, which is in the A. It's under that A, which is 23 general instruction classrooms. It's, yeah, on page 3.
So 23, it's basically 23 times 21. Got it. Thank
Yeah.
you. Yep.
On number 5, again, this is kind of looking at the approximate cost, and I thought this one is really important to have on here again, because even at the Board of Finance meeting, there was a comment, if I'm remembering correctly, and I didn't go back and check the tape, I will, was that they thought we could save, could be $5 million or $8 million, when in reality, that's why I want you to see that these core spaces don't change at all. And what we're really talking about would be the difference between 24 classrooms and 21 classrooms. Because I can say, I would say almost unequivocally, that the Board of Ed, based on the comments I've had just from individual members, we wouldn't have a majority that would send you an ed spec for 378, because they feel like it would be irresponsible. Especially when we've got a projection for 384. We're only at 350 students right now, and every classroom's full. You know, we would have 3 sections. We have 3 sections right now. So if you look at that, what we're really talking about when you're talking about the dollars and cents is those 3 classrooms at 800 square feet each. So you take that square feet and then you times $450 a square foot, which is kind of the going price that is recommended from the state, also based off previous work we've done. So really what we're talking about is that 1.5 million estimate around that cost. You do add in 30%, not on top of the 1.5, it's already built in that just for hallways, that little bit of extra square footage, you need to add 3 rooms. But that's really what we're talking about. We're not talking about going from 378 to 504 and saving $5 million. And that's something I think that's really important. This is the number we're really talking about.
Well, except that if again, going back to listening to the presentations from the other night, the question is one part, if that's all level land, that's fine. But if it's basically on a hill and with lots of ledge, the question is, what does the site? And one of the questions become is that I think I heard asked, but if not, it appeared in my mind, if nowhere else, is then Mill Hill the best place to add those 3 classrooms? If we have to add that, what's the cost on the site? And the site might add another $1 million to that, and whereas another site might not add that much to create that capacity for the district, if that's what's needed by the district.
Yeah, I think that, you know, if you go back to even what Malone and McBroom presented, we need space on that side of town. We need some seats on that side of town because, you know, I was just going through today looking at our buildings.
Okay, when you say the M&M brothers presented,
Malone and McBroom.
and sorry, I just, but could you tell me
M&M.
which presentation?
Yeah, basically, if you go back to the 2016 presentation, which had a very clear mission, and that was.
So I've got one from October
Right. There are
2017. I've got one from November 2017. I have one from February 2018 that lays out from them 6 different options.
Right.
You have February 16.
Is there a reason that in the presentations to the Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen, and in this handout, we weren't given the ones from 2016?
Actually, yes, because when we
You
first.
didn't want us to know.
No, no. It was presented in 2016. It's actually, a lot of the work that's been done was built on that. The mission of that study was, can we solve racial imbalance and also try to rebalance our buildings that are running at capacity? That has been kind of the mission and the charge. We were asked last spring with the financial circumstances that were going on, not only by this board, but by Board of Finance, to talk about structural change. So we did what we were asked to do in the fall, even trying to put the ad hoc committee together, which wasn't highly successful, but we did the work, which was a great thing out of that committee, and that we looked at, are there other options within the district that possibly could solve those 2 things? And one thing that we discovered out of doing that work is no. I mean, Malone and McBroom had looked at the district and said, in order to solve racial imbalance and also be able to stay within our guiding principles, and I'll give you an example. Sherman is full. We have extra seats at North Stratfield. So could we put Sherman students on the bus and say, you're going to North Stratfield next year? Absolutely, and school districts do that around the country. But it's also a way to have people stop regarding Fairfield as a awesome school district when you start doing things like that. And the guiding principles that the board has does consider their length of time on the bus, neighborhood schools, and in keeping with that philosophy so that you're not moving kids where they're on the bus, we need a 504 at Mill Hill and at Holland Hill is what they actually determined. The studies you're talking about are more that are coming from what we were asked to do this fall. Can you close a school?
This one's dated February of 2018.
Well, we did, the February one was the one I believe they did for the board. Do you remember which venue it was? That was for the board. And then what they did for Board of Finance was a collection of, they've done so much work for us.
Yeah.
And I fully understand that it is very difficult to take 2 and 3 years of, probably $60,000 worth of work and try to compact that into a 1-hour meeting and expect everyone's going to understand it.
Well,
So-
I'm going to suggest, and that watching that presentation in front of the Board of Finance was extremely painful, and it really took great strength to sit at the computer and watch that. But I'm going to suggest to you that you've just referenced something from 2016, and I don't have that in front of me. I'm going to suggest to you that what the Board of Finance spent over an hour and a half talking about was this page with these presentations, with these scenarios. There's not a single thing in writing that says why these aren't right. In fact, the consultant said these are okay, they are acceptable, they are reasonable. You're referencing something that hasn't been given to the boards. You're referencing an overall plan that we don't have, hasn't been presented to us. That's extremely frustrating. It makes it hard to see where you're going. Because this says, this marks 6 scenarios, 2 of which it says aren't feasible, 4 of which it says are feasible, 2 of which have 504 at Mill Hill, 2 of which have 378 at Mill Hill. There hasn't been a single presentation that I have seen that explains why 378 won't work, why 441 won't work, nor that it explains, and the presentation in the memo that you sent, and I know we need to spend more time on this, is focused purely on Mill Hill. And the projections for Mill Hill do not justify 504. I don't know what they justify in between, but the highest number is 384 in the student projections that we have here. And it was repeated again by the M&M team that building out Mill Hill to 504 would help us in overcrowding and help us in racial imbalance. Part of your letter says we're already using 23 of the 24 classrooms, so I'm not sure how that, if I believe that number, then it doesn't sound like that helps us. If we build another 24, that helps us with overcrowding if we already have 23 classrooms on site. So that's a little bit confusing. The fact that you're referencing a study from 2016, which doesn't seem to have been presented to the new Board of Ed at any point from these presents here. It wasn't presented to the Board of Selectmen, and it wasn't presented to the Board of Finance. They spent an awful lot of time talking about these scenarios. And when I followed up with members of the Board of Finance after, multiple members, they referenced this chart in these scenarios and said they couldn't understand how we got to 504. So I don't mean to have you answer all that now, but I think that we need to have those questions answered, and I think we need to see what the plan is for this. Because the questions are not purely about Mill Hill. The questions are in part, what's the overall plan for the district, which again was referenced several times at the Board of Finance meeting. What's the overall plan? And then I think the second question is, one part, what capacity do we need? But don't just tag that to Mill Hill. Is Mill Hill the best place to add that capacity?
Well, I think that, with all due respect, I do think it comes back to having some trust in the Board of Education who has studied this issue. And when I look at the scenarios that were presented, at the Board of Finance meeting, for me, and I'm not saying that for the Board of Finance or for the Board of Selectmen that it's as clear, because the Board of Ed lives with this work, but, when I looked at scenario A and B, for instance, it says they need a 504 in order for either one of those scenarios to work. When I look at scenario C, it says that once Holland Hill is completed, that's a possibility, priority, but it is pocket redistricting, and the school board has already, as recent as 2 months ago, said that they don't support pocket redistricting. And the community actually came forward and had quite a few people there that night as well. Scenario D says that it does not solve racial imbalance, and then the other two were not feasible. So if you go through what was presented, and maybe we didn't do that clear enough, and to that clarity, where people would understand they're not viable options to actually take care of balancing our school district in the schools and also racial imbalance.
Yeah, actually, it says when it's combined with C, option D says when combined with C, it does solve the racial imbalance.
Right, so if you look at the top where it says.
And if I
Roger-
might, the bottom chart here says feasible. All right? On C, it says feasible. And if we're not going to do pocket redistricting, one, I'm not sure I'm clear on what that means,
Right.
or why we wouldn't do that, and what's so damaging about that. And I'm going to suggest, if you're bringing forward a presentation for a $25 million project, you really want to dot i's, cross t's, and make sure that it's a comprehensive presentation, and you address all these questions. Because otherwise, it's not going to get voted for.
Right.
Now, Mill Hill needs this. We need the renovation. But we can do the renovation at 378. Right? We
Well,
need
I
the
don't think we would
renovation.
get I don't think we'd get an ed spec from the board approved and even brought forward for 378. I
That's
don't
okay.
know, I mean, again, we'd
Then
have to
you
allow them
need,
to go, but.
then, Dr. Jones, I think you need, what you're telling us here is you've presented plans that we're not using, that are not feasible. You just told me these aren't feasible. All right, you've presented 6 plans in 2 different PowerPoints that you've given our board that you're saying aren't feasible. Where's the one that is feasible?
The one that was done in 2016 is where it talks about the large redistricting, but
Right.
that is where Mill Hill, and when we came forward for Holland Hill, I think it was also shared as recent as when I was here last year, was to build to 504 at Holland Hill and Mill Hill in order to have space on both sides of town. And at the presentation at the Board of Finance, Malone and McBroom actually talked about that and showed the large map where all the houses were in 2016. But we can't go in and make a decision on exactly who would move where and what would happen if you don't have the construction, because over a 4-year period, that work that they're showing has to be redone again based on who lives in which houses and what grade levels.
Yeah, what I just heard you say is the plan we're using was developed in 2016, and we didn't present that to either the Board of Selectmen or the Board of Finance.
In 2016, I don't know that the racial imbalance plan was presented to either. It
We
would be
just-
to the Board of Ed.
We just asked you for support for Mill Hill. You gave us these projects and these plans, these scenarios, that you're saying don't work. I'm asking, when are you going to give us the one that does work so we can understand how Mill Hill supports that overall plan?
Yeah, and I'm sorry if I have misunderstood that this board was not privy to that information in 2016.
Forget 2016.
Well,
We're
we can
talking
send
right
that to
now.
you. Well, we can send that to you.
Okay.
We've done what I can say is we've done as much planning as a school district can do as far as redistricting and looking at what our options would be based on today. If we don't have $1.5 million in planning money to actually start looking at the project and moving forward, there is really nothing else that we can do. One of the reasons we presented these scenarios, and again, maybe that's my misunderstanding and what this board was asking us to do, because we presented to the board, and it was a great presentation, but we didn't have any, the Malone and McBroom did, any of the Board of Finance or Board of Selectmen there. And so when we were asked to present this information, this wasn't the Mill Hill item. This was a separate item to look at the work the board had done on looking at facilities and redistricting. When we were asked to do this presentation, it wasn't tied to the Mill Hill item. Now, Malone and McBroom ended up staying quite a bit that night, but that wasn't why they were there.
Dr. Jones, when I take issue with that, because the request for these presentations on enrollment projections
Yeah.
was done by this board.
Right.
We asked for a presentation on enrollment projections. We asked for this one. All right? We didn't ask for all this. We didn't ask for a presentation on 6 plans and scenarios that we're not going to use or we rejected. And I haven't seen anything on here that says we reject these. I haven't seen anything on here that says we rejected these and we decided to do this.
Well,
So one of the things that we're going to ask you to come back with is something that shows what our plan is. If these aren't the plan, and I've spent hours watching this discussion, and there's nothing more frustrating than spending hours watching something that we're not going to do. That's a waste of time, and it's a waste of emotion on doing that. So our question, if I can speak for my colleagues, is we want to know what we are doing. We want to see a plan for the district that we are doing. We want to see a plan for the district that says what the plan is for each of the schools, because we've got the projections for each of the schools. And then we want to see how Mill Hill is best served by that. And so when we talk about, I mean, it was talked about in the Board of Finance meeting about solving the overcrowding at Sherman by adding space on Mill Hill. So are we doing that or not? And I'm not looking for an answer now, but I am looking for an answer. And we are looking for an
If
answer.
we did that, wouldn't that be pocketed redistricting, which they've said they're not gonna do?
Well, I don't know what they're doing, so I don't know how to answer that.
I'm not sure what the definition of a pocket redistricting, fully is. Maybe that would help.
And I'm not, and somebody's gonna have to explain why it's not good, because and I'm not clear on what that is. But but the issue is, I think we've got 10-year enrollment projections in this presentation, and it was done in November 2017. It seems like we're using these, but it does show for Mill Hill, the highest it gets up to is 384, and that's in 25-26. We do have two other presentations here that I've got plenty of questions on. And you can see from the yellow stickers that I've done a lot of review of these and wrote down questions. And I'm more than a little frustrated when you tell me that it doesn't matter because we're not doing any of these. And yet I sat in front of a computer listening to all these scenarios be discussed and debated by the Board of Finance and your consultants, and nobody once stood up and said, hey guys, you can calm down now, we're not going to use any of this. We're going to use this other one that we didn't tell you about. So my question is, why don't we have something from 2016 that tells us what's going on? And somewhere in there, because when the 504 number was adopted, there wasn't a financial analysis done by school to see what the impact would be. But I think the real question that came out of the Board of Finance discussion was, this site has a tough topography and potentially major ledge and the need for blasting, that type of thing. Is this the best place to put the additional classrooms? As you pointed out, in some of these scenarios, it talked about, if we build out 504 at Mill Hill, do we shut down Dwight? Do we shut down Jennings? There's a lot of discussion around that, certainly. I'm assuming took place. But nobody told us about that. So we look at those, and that looks like a reasonable assumption, because the consultant said you could do that. But it's immensely frustrating to have that, and especially again, and I guess the other piece, and it gets back to, one, certainly in all of this, for anything to move forward, we're going to need a change in the ed specs or a better understanding of what the ed specs are. One of the comments made repeatedly at the meetings was that if 504 is too expensive, knock off 3 classrooms and that'll make it 441 and that'll be acceptable. So one of the questions we have is, that was stated at the meeting. So the question becomes, what is the school district plan if that works? It was also said that we need to get the 1.5 million to know that if we can't do this, build Mill Hill to a 504, then we have to make other plans. I'd rather not know what that means a year from now. If Mill Hill can't beat a 504 because of the site issues and the cost of making 504 on that site, not that we don't want to, just that it becomes impossible to do it financially there, what is the backup plan? Because in order to evaluate how much money you want to spend doing it at Mill Hill, you have to know what it costs or what the backup plan is, so there's a comparison. It's hard to do this in a vacuum, in that sense. And guys, I know I've been talking too much, if you wanted to add in.
No, I think you've done a great job laying out some of my concerns. When this was presented to us about a month and a half ago, I talked about, are we overbuilding or are we redistricting? Because at the time, I think the budgeted number was 320-something students at Mill Hill. Now it's up to 350. I don't remember what the number was, but I was going off of there. I recognize that you're telling us tonight that the number is now at 350.
It was 347 on October count.
Okay. All right, so 347, so we're 350 now. Well, I mean, we're talking about adding an awful lot there, which to me looks like overbuilding, unless you have the follow-up component, which is, I guess, what we're asking for today. What's the overall plan for the town? In the meantime, the Board of Ed has taken away pocket redistricting, which to me says, are you looking at a town-wide redistricting? And if you're looking at a townwide redistricting, why can't the two go on a parallel track right now so we can determine what it is? And I guess I would say, why hasn't that already been done? Because if Mr. Dwyer represented at the meeting that, for over 10 years, we've been dealing with a racial imbalance issue, we've been dealing with an overcrowding issue. We know we have an overcrowding issue at Sherman, we know about that, and, we had an opportunity when we increased Riverfield, we increased Osborne Hill, and we increased Holland Hill, and now we're talking about increasing Mill Hill, but yet we still don't have the overall issue. How are we addressing overcrowding? We've put things in place to address the overcrowding, we haven't used them. So it seems like that's just a can which gets kicked down, kicked down, kicked down. At some point, we want to see the can stop rolling, or I definitely want to see it stop rolling and see what exactly, like Mr. Tetra said, what the actual plan is. And then, I look at stuff in here, and I'm just going through it for the first time. It got to us late, but there are things in here I would talk to you offline about, which, I find, things. If Mill Hill is not built to 504, there will be long bus rides for some students. So the current students, if we're not talking about redistricting, are there currently students who are enduring long bus rides today?
At Mill Hill, no. Not that I would like going from Sherman to North Stratfield. Part of the problem, though, is as we are trying to take the enrollment pressures off, and we do need to solve racial imbalance, both of those issues have to be taken together. You can't just do one or the other. We know that if we're trying to solve both of those, we need Holland Hill at a 504 and Mill Hill at a 504. And if we don't do that, we are going to have to consider options, you're correct, that we would not think are as educationally sound for our children. And could that mean longer bus rides? Because I'll just give you an example of where we are in our buildings. Because, again, if you talk about the 21 versus 24, there's 3 classrooms. And Mill Hill is projected to be at 384. So we could get in those extra 30 kids, and 2 of those classrooms are gone. We now have 1 left. It's not just a matter of X amount of students. You have to look at the classrooms. If you look at Dwight has Dwight has 315 students. If you look at what it says on here, 378, but every classroom is full. There are no more classrooms to move Mill Hill kids or to move students from somewhere else, and we have to watch that across the district. And so that's why, it is complex. When you look at McKinley has no extra classrooms. Mill Hill, if we didn't have the trailers, would have no extra classrooms. Osborne Hill next year will have 1 room, 1.
Can I just, rather than trying to go through this verbally?
Yeah.
And I appreciate your command of the facts and being able to do that. I think what the board has asked is what's the overall plan? Because again, the frustration was you're referencing 2016, something we didn't see, and it may be very complex, and certainly you spent more time, but we haven't seen it. So nothing is more complex to understand than something you haven't seen. That's our frustration. That's our challenge. So we're asking that you come back with us and tell us what the plan is, so we can see how this all fits together.
At the risk of making you as angry as you were in January, the overall plan is 504 is what is in the best interest of this town, in the school district, in the children. That's the overall plan. The consultants did not recommend things. They said, here are some options, but it comes at a price. For the benefit of neighborhood schools and small class sizes, 504 is in the best interest of this town. That's the overall plan. The fact that we've spent $60,000 on what-ifs, hither and thon, the Board of Education considered all of those what-ifs and brought forward their recommendation. So I'm not sure exactly what, in addition, we could give to support that our recommendation was 504. The only other point I'd make is perhaps in January, I should have said, the Board of Education wants 504, and there's no alternatives. But our Board of Education has always said, we will work with town officials where there's a financial issue involved and try to find a medium ground. And this project is no different. If the $20,250,000 that is on the waterfall chart is exceeded by a great amount, not explained by environmental or something like that, and suddenly we can't build 24 classrooms there permanent, then the Board of Ed will look at the value engineering opportunities that exist, and they may say, no, we value the 24 classrooms. That'll be more valuable space to us in the future. So that what other changes can we make to bring the project within a proper financial scope? But that, until we get the information from the building committee, it is very hard for us to put out a whole lot of what is Plan B, and if Plan B doesn't work, what's Plan C, Plan D, Plan E. Let the building committee do its job, design to 504, show what the actual cost of those extra 3 classrooms are, and then next spring, we'll know whether the town can afford to build that at 504, because the overall plan says that side of town needs more space in the future. Maybe not at that particular school, but in that side of town. And so we need the capacity at Mill Hill to serve that side of town. So I take exception a little bit to the fact that there is no overall plan. There is. The debate, I honestly think, is on 3 classrooms, which is no different than what I said in January. Because just as you said, it's unlikely that the Board of Finance is going to want to support 24 classrooms.
So
Can I just finish my last comment? I would say it's very unlikely that the Board of Education would vote an ed spec at 378, because they would consider that to be irresponsible on their part to suggest to the town that that's a solution. I'm done, sorry.
Okay, so one of the things you just said was, we're building this at a 504 because that side of town may need the capacity in the future. Is that a correct statement?
They need it now, but in the future, yes.
Please, one person talking at a time.
So, they need so that statement to me basically says you have no interest in redistricting, no interest in racial imbalance right now, because you are building this school because in the future, that side of town may need those extra spaces. And that's where I get a little, I get frustrated because it's something different each time. I've heard you mention open choice, redistricting, and now we're building this because at some point in the future, that side of town may need that space.
And that side of town has 4 elementary schools, so your statement suggests that, quote, that side of town is only the current Mill Hill attendance boundaries. That side of town is really 4 elementary school attendance boundaries. And yes, over time, we may have to adjust attendance boundaries in order to make use of the space for the students on that side of town. So, I mean, it's...
Yeah, but again, I'll go back to, the time is now. We have overcrowding issues now. We have racial imbalance issues now. The time is now.
We cannot create a redistricting plan without knowing what space is available.
But you'll
and
never
when it will be
know.
available.
That's the whole thing. When do we stop building the schools coming down? What is the next one? Do we build Dwight at the 504? Because that's the next school which is going to be on the list to increase, because eventually we may know, we may need that space too. When does the moment stop where we stop building the schools at the maximum capacity we have and actually start facing the overcrowding and the redistricting?
The long-range capital plan, which goes out 10, 15 years, does not contemplate taking either Sherman, Jennings, Dwight to 504. We've never had that in the long-range plan. We have, for a long time, had Holland Hill and Mill Hill at 504. From a planning perspective, and I struggle with, to be blunt, the Board of Ed understands that the ideal size for an elementary school is 24 classrooms. And if we can afford it within the money that's on the waterfall chart, that's in the best interest of the town. But that we can look at alternatives if necessary. when the Board of Selectmen passed the original bonding resolutions, I believe that the three of you understood that to be, let's plan for 504, but have the building committee look at alternatives so we know how much that's costing us. The Board of Finance agrees with that. So what's frustrating is all three bodies agree with that, but we continue to debate as to whether we should plan that way and do a deduct alternate, or to pick a different number at the very beginning. The Board of Education's advice to you is to plan for the 504 and take a look at known numbers next spring. That's our plan.
Okay. Okay, to Dr. Jones. But that was not the outcome the other night. The outcome the other night was a bonding resolution that was amended to instruct a building committee to go back and in the short term, look at three different school levels. You know, the schematics versus the design phase, at least getting to the schematic size, because we're not going to get to the design drawing phase anytime soon, right? So my takeaway from watching that same movie was that the vote was 9-0, all right? It was unanimous. And the vote, as I understood it, was amend the bonding resolution to instruct the building committee or some other committee to be determined, but the building committee, as it was instructed, to go look at three different size schools and come back and give alternative pricing for each three. I did not understand that to be look at 504 with deducting things, or look at 378 and add things. So is that your understanding of what they did, and does the Board of Education agree with that action?
Well, you know, as a school superintendent, I can't judge whether or not their action was, you know, we have to, whatever the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen, you know, approve is what we'll do. Was I overly concerned that it was an exercise that would not fit into the 1.5 million? No.
Okay, so
I've
that's
been in
good to
growing
know.
districts my entire career and been in school construction, and it is very common to look at a school that's, for instance, started a 504, but it's a district that knows in the next 15 years they're going to see growth because they're growing 5% or 7% per year. And so you have a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 because they can't afford to do it all in one project. And so that's how an architect would look at it. An architect would look at the 504, and because you're talking about general education classrooms, it would be different, and again, this is very Mill Hill specific, because you saw the size of the cafeteria, you saw the size of the kitchen. None of that's changing. If it were a different scenario for a different building, it could look different, but none of those are changing. So you're only talking about gen ed classrooms. So an architect's gonna say, here's where I'm gonna put the classrooms, shave off 3 classrooms. Now, if they all fit in one area, that's much easier, but once they look at the land, they'll know that.
And that's useful information. I think it was point 2 and 3 to help us understand those core facility areas, where they're in, lacking today and where they need to be. So that's helpful. Thank you. When you look at the site, though, hey, back up for a second. You know, we've already had this before us, and certainly the project needs to get done. There's no question about that. And the school, the community, and the parents and the children, they need to get the project moved forward. The school needs to be renovated. I've not heard one person question that. Okay, so now we're on to these other issues, right? For instance, as Mr. Tetra was saying before, I mean, understanding the big plan is going to be very helpful for the 3 of us, the 9 of the Board of Finance members, and the 40 RTM members, right? To help us all collectively understand and work together to get this done and move forward, right? So having the big picture is most important. But specifically at a granular level, if we look at Mill Hill and we get in there and we can't do it, it's too expensive, there's too much rock, etc., what's plan B?
You know, Mr. Dwyer could probably speak to that better than I could, simply because of the history. I don't know what they've talked about, but generally with construction, you know, you start on a project and there are always unknowns in almost any construction project when you're talking about buildings that are built in the 50s, not let alone, you know, land issues that happen. And you deal with them. I mean, and as a school board, you know, and I think that's exactly what Mr. Mr. Dwyer was just saying about if it comes back where the cost is more than anticipated, and you start looking at value engineering. And then if you have to shave off 3 classrooms because of cost, you do that because you build what you can. And then as a school district, you go back and you look at your whole district again. And you problem solve through that. And I would imagine that's how we ended up having 70 trailers all around the district, because if you get caught off guard and you allow that to build up over time, that's what happens, because you can't build fast enough to fix those issues. And I think that's part of what, you know, the board is saying right now. The difference between 441 and 504 is 3 classrooms.
Okay. And we've worked hard to get rid of those portable classrooms
Yeah.
over the past 15 or 20 years, and
Yeah.
we're very proud of that, right?
Yeah,
And that's the right direction for us to go in. But my question, you didn't quite answer my question.
Okay.
My question is not what do we do construction-wise at Mill Hill, but if we can't, when you look at that map that was up last night or at the meeting, you can see that the west and the northwest part of town, you know, we have issues with capacity, right? And so we need to put some seats on that side of town, as I understand it, because we're not gonna bus kids across town, right? And we're not gonna pocket redistrict, even though I'm still not crystal clear on what that means. But, so we need some seats on that side of town. So if we can't put the seats at Mill Hill, because it might be money, it might be Rockledge, it might be whatever, then where do we put the seats?
Well, you have to go back and look at the whole district of shifting. So let's say you're 50 seats short. You're really looking at, and it really, and I hate to use the word seats simply because it really is about the classrooms. Because you can
Fair.
be 40 under and still have the same amount of classrooms, but they're sitting with 20 instead of 18 or 21.
Right.
But that's where you have to go back in and you have to look, because we also, you know, Sherman is at capacity right now, but there's an awful lot of house construction going on. So what really is going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years is they're knocking down these you know, smaller homes and building the newer ones. So
Right.
that's, I mean, every school district deals with that. And new construction has an impact. You know, I happen to live in one of the mixed-use buildings that's a brand new here. I have children up and down the hallways that they didn't have that building to live in previously. So as those things happen around a school district, you're always, you know, adjusting and thinking about that. And I think in Fairfield, we've been very fortunate that we haven't grown at a rate recently in the last couple of decades where we've had to do frequent redistricting. But if we're short 50 seats, you know, if it's 1 classroom or 2, then you have to look at how you can shift to make that happen. And it's generally moving a population to the next closest building. That population moves to the next closest building. But you're trying to be as equitable as you can for all families, because it's a tough thing.
Can I combine a question that was asked
Please,
15 minutes ago with your question?
please.
Pocket redistricting. My understanding is we have generally used that, is that there are school districts who accept as a planning guideline that every 3 to 5 years we'll move a district boundary in order to make up too many seats at one school and put them to another school. This town has not wanted to, quote, pocket redistrict and have parents say, somewhere in that 6-year period my kid's in school, I'm likely to be sent to another school. And if I'm unlucky enough and I get there just at kindergarten and I get sent one place on 1st grade and suddenly 5th grade I'm in yet a 3rd place. So pocket redistricting is generally a planning principle that says plan on redistricting in order to make use of space much more frequently than our town has wanted to. We've wanted to stay with the neighborhood schools and not put our parents, and that requires, I'll say, an occupancy rate at neighborhood schools to be lower than the 95% that maybe other districts are willing to work at because they take a different planning principle. What is Plan B? There are alternatives, but the Board of Ed does not find that to be the preferred way to go.
Okay.
Could you, next spring, if you say it's impossible to build at that site, forget about the difference between 3 classrooms and whatever, it's just the ledge, the whatever, it's impossible. That would require, okay, what are the other alternatives that we would want to employ to solve the problem, and at what cost? And I don't think it's possible for a Board of Ed to ask those kind of what-if questions before they know whether the original plan that they think is the best plan is actually not feasible. But there are alternatives, and as Dr. Jones mentioned, we will problem solve to that question if it comes to pass.
Thank you.
I think
I just have a quick follow-up.
Vice Chair wants to.
Sorry, hi, Jen Jacobson. Speaking continuously on the pocket redistricting issue, the one that we rejected as a board that says was feasible in that plan that you mentioned previously for Sherman was to send them to Holland Hill. 97 kids that currently, a lot of them actually walk to Sherman today, would be put on a bus and sent up to Holland Hill. The issue with the plan from Malone and McBroom on that issue, that problem alone that I just said, was that Holland Hill goes to a different middle school. Holland Hill goes to Woods. Woods is already over capacity today, and you would be adding another 100 into that feeder plan. So it is unfeasible because of the system effect of it, not only the concept for us being inappropriate or unacceptable in this community to take 97 kids in isolation, separate them from their community that they now walk to, and send them to Holland Hill. So that follows up on that pocket redistricting. But generally speaking, pocket redistricting is not deemed, I don't know what word you want to put on it, but it is not deemed something that any board has in this town looked at doing regardless of time over this time that I've been around, because it's an isolating act, and that you're taking a small handful and using that small handful of kids to solve district-wide issues.
Okay, so in that example, there's
Yeah.
two issues.
Yes.
Right? There's the feeder pattern issue that you
Yes.
just described, and there's the additional expense for the busing that wasn't in last year's budget.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Although, this is not a budget question.
I understand that, but
It's really an
but
educational
Jen's
value.
example would have
But-
increased my bus cost.
Right, that wasn't even part of my reasoning, but.
But it would.
Right, it
Yeah.
would, yes.
Right. Okay.
Any other comments from the board?
At the moment, no.
If I can summarize a couple things. One is that we didn't mention, we had a chance to tour Sherman. We'd love a chance to tour Mill Hill, if you can help us do that, so we can get a better understanding of just what's there. Thank you. I'm sorry, Dr. Jones, did you have more things to add, or? do
Oh.
you-
No, I mean, I think for the rest of the memo, you can read that on your own, and we got through everything except the last two items, but.
Okay.
All right, why don't we kind of talk offline and see if there's any other information we request, other than what we
Okay.
requested so far. And if you just route that through me, I'll get it to the superintendent so we can see what we can do from there.
I think that works, yes. It'll give us time to review this as well, because it's hard for me to both read and pay attention at the same time, so.
And it
I
may
think
be-
you need to
sorry.
be,
And it may be helpful if you can, as quickly as possible, do the tour, and
Sure.
then take either questions from tonight and the tour, and try and get them answered as quickly as possible.
Right.
well, yes, and I just say that we've asked a number of questions and put in some requests as we've talked here. I think they will all stand, so if you can start working on those, that would be helpful. If not,
Can those get summarized for us in some way, because that's not, I'm not sure.
We've been
that-
keeping notes.
You've got notes, okay, thank you.
Yeah, I just want on behalf of the board ask that you really move quickly on this if possible, that we would like to stay on the timeline that we have, because if we delay this, not only is this a great disservice to the community of Mill Hill and those students, because those portables have got to be removed as quickly as possible, but we incur another legislative session that could possibly change reimbursement rates, and the cost automatically will go up about 4% overall with every year this goes on. So if we could do this as swiftly as possible, I know the board would probably appreciate that, as would the Mill Hill kids and families. Thank you.
Along those lines.
Yes.
As far as scheduling and next steps in the process and things like that, what is the Board of Education's thought on your next step? Are you going to make answering these questions an only offline exercise, or are you looking to have a planning meeting at one of your upcoming meetings or a special meeting? Because between the questions that came out of the Board of Finance a few nights back and the questions that are going to come out of this meeting here today, maybe a meeting to open all that discussion up makes sense, to collaborate and to, consolidate responses.
To the chair?
My guess is that it's the superintendent's responsibility to provide answers to your questions and to the Board of Finance's questions, based on available information from all the studies and from the several years of debate of boards of education on this issue. While there may be questions for clarification, the only debate that the Board of Education would be having, I think, at the moment, is the central one that has been driving this discussion. How many general ed classrooms do we provide for at that location? Is, I think, the only one that the board would be saying, that is a principled education value question. And so, at the moment, I have not contemplated having the board meet on the other questions because I think they're administrative in nature. Once I see the list that Mr. Cullen put together, I might say, oh, okay, that question does belong before the board. But at the moment, I think the only question is what size school in terms of general ed classrooms.
Yeah. I'm not sure I agree with that, and here's why.
Well,
Because
what issues do you think we're?
Well,
Excuse me, if you would, just let him finish.
I think
Thank you. I'd
when
like
we're,
to
no, that's fine. And you might want to stay and answer. And I'm not telling you how to run your board. I'm just thinking out loud that if there are a lot of questions, number one, there's two big buckets of questions, right? And whether they're administrative or whether they require board input or collaboration, I don't know those answers, right? But there are some questions that have come up that I think are more global in nature, right? We don't like to do this, or as a board, I've heard, we like to do this, or we don't like to adhere to that, right? Whether it's the pocket redistricting, or how do we solve the racial imbalance thing in conjunction with this project, or how do we solve our overcrowding at some other schools that we currently have in conjunction with this project? A more global view. In fact, we talked about this back at our meeting the first time, and we talked about having flexibility, right? Flexibility to solve problems. It's a good thing, whether it's flexibility to solve, either of those issues. The racial imbalance, the overcrowding that we currently have. So maybe we do have to have a larger conversation so that those thoughts and those opinions, or the voice of the board, becomes part of this recommendation. Does that make sense?
I think that's spot on.
Yeah.
Again, it's your board.
It's not clear to me, no.
Okay.
It's not clear to me what it is, the question that you want the board to answer.
Okay.
The planning principles were done in 2010, were revised and updated in 2015. I guess you could say, are those planning principles in 2018 still ones that the board believes in? That could be a discussion. I think the answer will be yes, but that could be a discussion. The size of the school could be a discussion as to whether we want to say we'll stay at 504 because we believe 24 classrooms are still the best model, and we don't want to say, no, let's do 21. We'd rather say, now that we know the cost of those extra 3 classrooms, based on that information, then make a decision, is I suspect the debate that we would have on that question. I don't know what other specific question that the board would need to entertain that is not already known and would be answered through the administrative offline basis. Is there a third point that, beyond those two, that you were thinking about?
No, you've answered my question.
Because I'm willing to do that, just that I've got to be clear as to, so that we don't have a meeting, come back, and you say, well, how come you didn't ask this question?
Thanks.
I have a question. What happens at some other place, or a Plan B, have to do with the 1.5 seed money to do the site work at Mill Hill, to know all of these questions that you have?
Simply put, the 1.5 seed money is going to go to the Board of Building Committee. The Building Committee is given a charge by this body. The charge by this body is going to say file the ed spec. The project's dead in the water as long as the ed spec says 504 and the bonding resolution says what it says here. Nothing moves forward. We need to work with the Board of Ed to come up with a resolution that we get other boards to agree on to move forward.
So are you uncomfortable with that bonding resolution as it stands now, to send that to the RTM?
If we send it to the RTM and we give the Building Committee a charge to file the ed spec, and the ed spec says 504, it dies.
Okay, so one thing possibly would be the ed spec to match the resolution, to move it more quickly through, as a possible discussion item.
That would be one of the issues.
Okay.
But that would still require the Board of Selectmen to pass the same Board of bond resolution that the Board of Finance did. If our ed spec, the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen all had an ed spec bond resolution that matched, is that an acceptable solution?
Well, that's why I asked.
That's one of the possibilities. Whether it's acceptable or not, I don't know. We've asked a number of questions here, including seeing the 2016 plan. Got to tell you, I'm still disappointed. We spent hours talking about plans and scenarios we're not going to do. I'd like to know what the superintendent referenced in 2016 is the plan that we are going to do. I think it's reasonable that the Board of Selectmen understand the plan that the Board of Ed is moving on. Since it has been done in 2016, since we spent hours and days reviewing plans we're not going to do, and we finally found some rationales for why we're not going to do those, so thank you, Ms. Jacobson. I'd like to know what we're doing and why this fits. We've seen the Mill Hill number go up and down over the last few years, and that's been referenced. We've heard statements that said if 504 is too expensive, we'll do 441. We've heard statements that 504 at Mill Hill will solve overcrowding and the racial imbalance. We'd like to know how. And since there's a plan that has that in place.
Yeah, there is a plan that shows that.
Okay, well,
It's not been voted on by the board.
Okay, if I can. Up until now, it hasn't been presented to this board. All right, so we're asking what the plan is. That's not unreasonable when we're being asked to spend $25 million. So that's what we're asking.
I'm interested, what's the plan which hasn't been voted on by the board? And has the whole board seen it? Do they know about it?
Malone and McBroom has, over the last 3 years, provided 6 to 8 to 9 different scenarios.
We've already talked about those.
And yes, and those are the alternative plans. What we voted on was to advance Mill Hill, Holland Hill and Mill Hill as 24 classroom buildings.
To address overcrowding?
To address overcrowding.
Via which mechanism?
Excuse me?
How?
By having the capacity on the west side of town to match the capacity that is on the east side of town.
And I think we'd like to, and rather not to belabor the point here,
Rick.
we would like to see that back. We'd like to see what the plan is.
It was in the Board of Finance presentation. So the Board of Finance presentation on April 3rd that Malone and McBroom gave to Board of Finance had those maps from the 2016 presentation as a part of it. So if you either listened or watched or were present or have the Board of Finance presentation on April 3rd, the maps from the 2016 presentation were in that agenda.
Is there a PowerPoint or something that breaks it out and shows what's happening like these?
Do you have the Board of Finance backup materials with you from April 3rd, or were you at that meeting, or did you watch it?
I watched it. I wasn't at the meeting. I have these packets that were given to the Board of Selectmen. I thought they were the same.
Okay, it's up online, so it's easy
Yeah.
enough to give you both the 2016 presentation, which obviously would need to be updated with 5 year later kids, because it was.
Look,
Right. I know what you.
here's
I
the deal,
don't know you
guys.
get into the weeds.
Can we stop?
Yeah,
Just stop.
totally.
Let's go
And
back.
give you all
Here's
of
what
it.
we want,
Right.
as simply as I can say it. We want to know what plan you're following today, and we want to know what plan Mill Hill project is supporting, with the details, guys. We want a presentation back on that.
Okay, that's easy enough, right? Yeah, it was in. It's just-
Can I go back to one thing, please?
Go.
It's the bonding resolution. I'd asked a question before of Dr. Jones if you were comfortable with how it was written. Not legally, but with the options contained. And then we just talked a little bit a few minutes ago about if there was an ed spec that matched the bonding resolution, could that make this process easier, smoother, faster, et cetera? Am I to take that you folks are good with what that bonding resolution says as a next step, as an action?
You're asking if the Board of Education would be.
Yeah, I am.
We would accept it as a way of moving the project forward.
Okay.
We would struggle mightily to say, why are we even talking about 378? Because it's just too small to meet the needs of the town. But in order to move the project forward, if the town bodies wanted to say, well, tell us the answer to what if we build it at 378, what is the cost differential, we'll do it.
Okay.
May not be something we would recommend.
I hear
but
ya.
We would do it.
Okay.
So
Thank
that's
you.
why we say, yes, it's acceptable.
See, that's
Down that path.
somewhere in all this, what I was looking for, given those are the numbers that was laid out, is something back from the Board of Ed that says functionally why those numbers would or wouldn't be acceptable. Because if they're acceptable, and because what this says is, show us those three without prejudice toward any option. All right? If there's going to be a prejudice, it's got to come from the Board of Ed, because otherwise, the cheapest one wins. And I don't think that's what you want. So we need to know
That's kind of why I'm asking,
what
sir.
they don't do. Like functionally, if we do 378, what doesn't happen? Functionally, if we do 441, what doesn't happen? And somewhere in here, someone has to justify, I haven't heard a clear, cogent explanation on what the benefits of 504 are, other than it solves overcrowding and solves racial imbalance, but nobody showed us how that happens.
One more thing too, and I just gone. Does the 2016 M&M report, does that take into account open choice students? Is that part of their plan?
It's only part of their plan to the extent that we have always had open choice students. So those open choice students have always been part of our count. And so they say, where are you now and where do we think you're going? So the answer would be yes, that it's taken into account from that perspective.
So the M&M plan says moving forward, we expect the town to take into account adding X amount of students a year? Is that what I'm hearing?
No, that number of students are what we currently have, and there'll be some reasonable growth number that they attach to it, but nothing, I think, beyond that.
I think what I heard them say is they kind of assume it's a steady state. There's not tremendous growth and there's not reduction.
They did say that.
This is a stable community, so we do not expect sudden jumps
Yeah.
one way or the other. But in 10,000 students, even a sudden jump from 65 to 75 is still only 10 students.
Mhm.
All right, thank you. Any further
No,
discussion
I'm
from the
good.
board?
Thank you for the discussion.
All right, and Dr. Jones, perhaps we can follow up offline just to clarify any questions that come up also, if that's okay with you. All right, and if you could get back to us on the kind of Mill Hill visit, that would be super. And yes, as been said, it's important that we move the Mill Hill project along once we define what it is. All right, next up, from the tax collector, to consider and act upon tax refunds as recommended by the tax collector in the amount recommended by the tax collector. May I have a
Make a
motion
motion.
to consider?
I'll make a motion.
A second, all right. Any edits or changes?
Yes, I have a edit.
All right.
I'd like to insert the amount of $137,023. Oh boy, nope.
137.
It's the 07.
71.
71.
71.29.
129, yes.
Yeah.
I'll second that.
That was 137,071.29.
Second.
All right. All right, is there any further discussion?
Nope.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you. And then with that, may I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Jerry, the mic's off?